Hello custom collectors and welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to show you what I did to make my 3D printed Gladiator Hulk to look like this. If you haven't seen the first video where I prepared the statue for painting, go check that out first. First of all, I took a piece of paper to compare the different green colors that I have. I ended up with the second one from the left, which is called Goblin Green. Then I loaded up my airbrush and gave all of the body parts the first coat of green paint. For the spots that I couldn't really reach with the airbrush, I used a normal paintbrush. And then I loaded up the airbrush with dark green to do some shading. You can't really go too heavy with the shading, since you can always tone it down later with your original base color. I also tried to airbrush the veins, but wasn't really satisfied with the result, so I switched over to the paintbrush. For masking, I tried something new this time. I bought some magic dough or putty, but you can also search for silly putty if that's available in your country. It just wasn't for me. This putty keeps the shape you bring it into and doesn't dry out. Compared to your regular masking tape, the masking is so much easier and faster when you have to mask off organic and complex shapes. However, I would recommend a putty without magic glitter in it. For Hulk's loincloth, I started with a mahogany brown. The X and all of the parts that will have some kind of metal look were painted with a base coat of black. With thinned down smoky ink, I weathered the black parts. And then I mixed charred brown with a little bit of silver and painted the left arm and helmet with it. For the shoulder pad and the helmet, I used Glorious Gold and gently dry brushed it on. Then I used another layer of watered down charred brown to weather the arm and helmet. Afterwards, the gold tone was a little too subtle, so I did another round of dry brushing with Glorious Gold. Remaining at the helmet, I started to paint Hulk's Iroquois, wrapped the torso up in plastic wrap and painted everything with a basic red. Because I didn't want to have a boring plain red, I tried to create some sort of color gradient from the bottom to the top. So I loaded up the airbrush with black and painted along the lower border. Then I dry brushed more black, but I wasn't satisfied with the result, so everything back to the beginning. Then I used scarlet red instead of black, which gave me a more decent gradient, and that was the effect that I was looking for. To paint his leather straps, I base coated them first with grey and then used charred brown to paint them. I also wasn't too satisfied with the brown of his right hand, so I used charred brown again to redo the hand. Initially I wanted to paint the axe two-colored with a silver blade and the rest of the body black, so that's why you see me painting the blade silver here, but later on I was not really satisfied, so you will see me change it. And then I went back to the start and painted everything black again. Then I painted almost the whole top part of the axe with gunmetal. For the handle I used leather brown, which in my opinion looks more like mustard than leather. And because it didn't look like leather at all, I tried to create a bit of texture with the airbrush. For that I used two different kinds of filter floss. Then I dry brushed the head of the axe with tinny tin. And finally everything got a wash of black and smoky ink. The panties that I sculpted were painted with black as well. Shoes were painted with smoky ink and the shoe straps with mahogany brown. A little bit of cleanup with the brush. And then I painted all of the buttons and parts that will receive a gold look with smoky ink. For the shoe buttons and buckles I used polished gold. To weather the loincloth or to make it look like real leather, I used a mix of leather brown and mahogany and the filter floss from before and just dipped the filter floss in the paint and then went over Hulk's loincloth. With a brush I went along all the edges where the leather would crack and tear over time. After all the leather parts were weathered, I cleaned up a bit with the original base coat color. With a mix of glaze medium and sick green, I painted the lips to separate them from the skin color. The glaze medium increases the transparency of the color, so the difference between the lips and the skin won't be too harsh. Then I painted the eyeballs with bone white and the iris with dark green. For my first attempt of drawing eyes, I'm quite satisfied with the outcome. The eyebrows were painted with black and corrections can easily be done with the base color. With gloss varnish I sealed the eyes, and with satin varnish all of the metal and leather parts. I used a brush for that because it's way faster than to mask everything for the airbrush. Up next was a really tricky part, getting the nails to look right. There was a lot of going back and forth until I was happy with the result. Then I started sealing the skin parts with matte varnish. Again, to not waste any time masking, I used the brush. From my experience with varnishes, there is no problem of getting an uneven surface when it's dry. Then I used a liquid masking to highlight the shoulder pad spikes to make them pop more. When the liquid masking fluid dries, it creates a thin latex layer on your object. With a mix of silver and gold, I painted the spikes and blended the colors with smoky ink. For the final shading, I mixed different tones of pastel colors and went into all the crevices. With Q-tips you can remove the excess. And because the pastel was a bit too harsh, I toned it down with dark green that I used before for shading. Then I used the airbrush to seal everything with matte varnish again. After using pastel, you can't use the brush anymore because you would just smudge it. However, after that I also needed to redo the gloss varnish on the eyes and the satin varnish at all the leather parts. want to print the base that came with the model, so I decided to create one with foam. With an electric foam cutting tool, I brought the foam into a basic shape and then wrapped blaster bands around it. Afterwards, I used watered down wood glue and sand to give the base some structure. I also wanted to use the female key on Hulk's foot, so I created the male part of the key with a piece of wood and millipede. To find the right position for the hole I needed to drill, I used a drop of black paint, which will give me the exact point. With a special glue for foam, I secured the male part of the key to the base. I originally wanted to go for a Mars type of color, but after I used some orange fire and a bit of shading with black, I just couldn't unsee the schnitzel. So I recolored everything with a mix of black, white and a tiny bit of blue. And then everything was done, and now it's time for the final reveal. If you like this video, please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.